Well, no doubt it's the same in medicine. Ultimately, there aren't just these discrete diseases and so on most of the time, and that's you know, that's the way we have to set things up right now, because ultimately we have only a discrete set of possible actions, treatments and so on that we can apply. So one day this is all going to change, whether it's through sort of ubiquitous real-time sensors and control systems that are based on those, or at a much more microscopic level by picking combinations of drugs or something, or even by having a drug that doesn't just sort of bind to some particular fixed active site, but is an actual algorithmic drug where individual molecules or other sort of nanoscale objects can do computations and figure out what to do in real time. Maybe, at least for a while, it'll be convenient to package these things in sort of complete synthetic organisms or something. One of the big lessons of studying the computational universe is that there are always lots of ways to do things. So going through sort of the whole scheme of current biology is unlikely to be necessary to achieve some particular purpose. Instead, we'll probably be able to get our computations and algorithms to run on sort of much simpler nano infrastructure. Of course, that doesn't mean that programming these things will necessarily be any easier. In fact, I've no doubt sort of the big issue all over the place will be computational irreducibility, that even when we've carefully set up all sort of the microscopic rules, knowing what their overall consequences will be irreducibly hard. You know, in the world of practical computing, we're already used to a version of this phenomenon, because that's why debugging is hard. I mean, even if we can read the code, it can be fundamentally difficult to figure out how that code will end up behaving. Of course, that hasn't stopped us building very large and successful software systems, and nor will it stop us building analogous systems in biomedicine. I mean, I shudder to think what all the regulatory aspects and so on of all of this will be. But in software, we developed all kinds of strategies for handling these types of things. For example, recognizing that there will always be bugs, and just managing their priorities and having pipelines for fixing them, retesting them, all those kinds of things. So, you know, I must say that in the future, as we have sort of more medical information, I expect our own medical situations will look a lot more like that we'll all know we have all sorts of little things wrong with us. We'll be getting priorities assigned to our various bugs and fixing the ones that aren't too hard and so on. Actually, there'll be a little more to it. I mean, in software, we occasionally study how a particular system degrades when it runs longer, you know, fragments its memory or whatever. But we're usually pretty happy to have the system reboot, in effect, to force the system to die and restart, not with people. So we need to study a lot more about how sort of things evolve during the lifetime of the system, of the person. Right now, an awful lot looks like it's just probabilities. Given this or that genetic feature or lab finding, there's just a certain probability to have this or that go wrong. It sounds a bit like in the financial market, where sort of at a first blush there's just lots and lots of randomness. And the best one can do is try to sort of get ahead of the probabilities by analyzing fundamentals, by hedging things, and so on. Well, perhaps we'll do a little of that in medicine, but I suspect that despite computational irreducibility, we're going to be able to do considerably better at making predictions. There'll come a time when all of us will no doubt have some giant sort of health dashboard with all kinds of measurements and time series and so on it, and then in effect simulations going on of what will happen and what the effects of different choices or circumstances or whatever will be. There'll be sort of a whole giant quant-like infrastructure and industry of automated and human advice about how to optimize all these kinds of things. I mean, computational irreducibility pretty much guarantees that there won't be one right answer. There'll be all sorts of detailed cases that depend on sort of unknowable future circumstances and so on. Okay, so what does this look like in the shorter term? It's sort of interesting to see what we've managed to do with Wolfram Alpha, for example, so far. For example, we've taken large public health studies, made them computable, so we can ask all sorts of questions, and if the information is there, we'll be able to compute answers to them. And though it's been a very tricky business, we're soon going to be able to, for example, do the best kind of Bayesian thing of going backwards from symptoms that you enter to probabilities for diagnoses and so on. There are many problems. The most obvious is that the data isn't that clean and there isn't enough data. Actually, it's kind of very frustrating for us in a certain way, because an important part of our business with Wolfram Alpha is curating internal data for organizations to set up custom Wolfram Alpha experiences, often with on-site Wolfram Alpha appliances and things like that. So now we've done that in lots of industries, including in healthcare. And that means we've seen all sorts of healthcare data, very extensive healthcare data, which of course we can't use in our public system. at some level, there's always going to be a necessity to protect privacy, but what we need is a nice streamlined way to be able to have all the detailed data inside our system so that we can compute whatever is asked from it, but then have some definite protocols for sort of fuzzing things out to protect privacy about where this data particularly came from. I have to say that in completely different domains, there are similar, though simpler, issues with secrecy and security and so on, where those problems have been solved. So I'm hopeful it will happen for medical data too. Now, of course, what may happen, and we're starting to see this, is that there will be things sort of closer to social networks that build up. And it won't be that the medical establishment that's getting us the next generation of medical information. It'll be individual people motivated for all sorts of reasons to upload data. Of course, that data will be a bit messy, just as it always was, with wrong diagnoses, oversimplified coding, all kinds of biases, whatever. But just having vastly more data will help a great deal. And you know, the data quality issue, I think, is ultimately just going to solve itself. Because increasingly what we'll upload will come from automated sensors and things, from a whole bunch of devices we wear and interact with and so on. I mean, it's becoming so easy to store and measure so much. Well, somebody like me has been sort of an informational pack rat for many years. I mean, I sort of archived everything, measured, you know, every keystroke I've typed into a computer for the last couple of decades, and hundreds of millions of them, all sorts of strange things like that, medical and otherwise. There's a whole industry of sort of personal analytics that I think is going to grow up, sort of ingesting data like that, and then in some cases curating it and then computing things from it. So we learn more about ourselves so we can predict and optimize what we're doing, or at least be amused by it. So you know, soon image processing and video capabilities are going to get to the point where we can routinely get data that way too. There'll be sort of a competition between instrumentation, RFID, QR codes, location-based systems, things like that, and directly doing things like analyzing images. I mean, say, you know, to work out the nutrition content of something we're eating, either analyze the visual image or be able to read the QR code off the menu or something. Well, but the end of it is that it's going to become sort of trivial for us to have amazing amounts of data that effectively give us medical information. There's our genomes, too. I got my whole genome sequenced last year, and so far I've been a bit disappointed by how little I've been able to figure out from it. But I don't know what all the motivations will be yet, but somehow, as the cost of sequencing goes way down, we're going to find lots of people getting sequences and uploading them. No doubt we'll be able to extrapolate to past generations and sort of compare with genealogical records and gradually fill in all sorts of things. Right now, if we want to know the effects of different kinds of interventions and so on, pretty much all we can do is to mine the medical literature, hopefully as automatically as possible. And for sort of extreme interventions, that'll probably be all we ever have, though in each case there'll be vastly more raw data that's been collected and hopefully curated and organized in good ways. But for sort of milder interventions, well, then we should be able to sort of see what's going on in a much more crowdsourced kind of way. Okay, so now let's say each of us is collecting all this ongoing data on ourselves. How do we figure out what it means? We can do it sort of as a lookup comparing with existing data, or we can actually try to compute with models. In time, I'm sure there will be that the models will win out. There'll be a lot of pressure to have them because that's the only way we get to sort of assess possible interventions and courses of action. You know, in the short term, what I think you'll see is that, you know, when you enter symptoms into Wolfram Alpha, let's say, if you've also uploaded your personal analytics data, then probabilities of different kinds of things will get a little narrower. Eventually, there'll be all sorts of detailed predictions and scenarios that can be described. At first, it'll just be sort of tweaks to known approaches and treatments. But I'm guessing that as we know more, we'll start to see more and more custom situations. So we'll really be forced to sort of compute things, to mass customize, and to automate the process of coming up with new, in effect, creative discoveries. In biomedicine, we've seen a certain amount of things like, you know, random screening of possible drug candidates, things like that. But from understanding the kind of computational universe, we realize there's vastly more like that can be done. Actually, in building Wolfram Alpha, for example, and even in the current versions of Mathematica, we've routinely been doing algorithm discovery. In effect, just sort of searching the computational universe of possible algorithms and finding programs that we can use for particular purposes. And that's the kind of approach that we should be able to use to what amounts to finding not only the materials for biomedicine, but also the procedures to use. Well, I think I lost track of time, and I've already gone on too long, so I should probably stop here. But I hope I've been able to give you sort of a little flavor of how I at least currently see the kind of bio-IT kind of world. And there are lots of exciting developments ahead. I'm pleased that it seems as if between Wolfram Alpha and Mathematica and new kind of science, we're going to be able to make some contributions to what can be done. But thank you very much.